Well, the process of identifying bodies burned beyond recognition in the Johannesburg fire has begun. eNCA's senior reporter Aviwe Mtila still monitoring the latest developments, of course, regarding this, but also what's been happening at the Diepkloof mortuary. But he joins me now live to give us an update. Aviwe, once again, we are placing the spotlight here on the families conducting those DNA identification processes. How's it looking so far? And also, how are the burial plans going?
Well, by sunset, we're expecting that the 9 deceased that have officially been identified by the families from Malawi will be laid to rest at the Lenasia Cemetery. I'm actually outside the Forensic Pathology Services in Diepkloof, where the bodies still remain now. I do understand that it's from those 12 that could be visibly identified, but the families needed to come forward. It seems like the families have now come forward. Even in the course of yesterday, I was speaking to one of the relatives who described how they had to identify 5 of their own family members, but we do know the total number is now 9 of those that have been deceased, all coming from Malawi and all expected to be laid to rest today as of those Muslim rites. You can even see some of the burial services and the cars that are expected to take the deceased from the Forensic Pathology Services here in Diepkloof and then transport them to Lenasia. We were just outside the building that went up in flames 2 nights ago, early hours of the morning, in fact, where hundreds of the Malawians were there in their numbers. And in fact, they were waiting for transport. And when we left, the transport had finally arrived in the form of bakkies, which we do know that they paid money themselves, whether it be 2 rands, your 5 rands, 20 rand, coming up with whatever money they could afford so that they can be taken as Malawians and then driven to Lenasia. So we're waiting now for the bodies and the remains of the deceased to leave here, expecting them then to go to Lenasia. I can see some of the family members come out. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get a word. But Dwama, are you here with the Malawi delegation?
Yeah, so now we are going now to graveyard now. Yeah.
You are going to the graveyard now. Have you've done with the process of identifying your relatives?
No, I can't talk about that, but you must ask him.
Okay, so maybe you just fill us in on the latest. Are the deceased ready to be transported now to their final resting place? Maybe just an update on what's happening.
My name is Wisdom Johansen. I'm from Malawi. Yeah, sorry for that issue. Now we are going to graveyard. Yeah, we are here because to take your funeral. Now we are going to graveyard. Okay. Yeah.
And I can only imagine how the families are doing.
But anyone now is crying because of this issue. Yeah, he's crying because of this issue.
Okay.
Yeah. Even me, I'm crying. Yeah.
And I see the burial societies and services here. Maybe just indication on who paid for the funeral services themselves.
This country is the one who trusts us. Yeah, is the one who trusts, and everything is even the transport. What is the one who trusts this country?
All right. Yeah. Condolences to you and the countrymen of Malawi for the loss, of course, of the 9 bodies that have been identified. The road now leads to the Lenasia Cemetery, where we're expecting, Tumelo, the remains of the 9 people that passed away in that fire that have been identified at the stage visibly to be laid to rest tonight, before sunset, according to the Muslim rites. So we're expecting then the convoy here to leave any moment now, as we saw some of the family members actually make their way to the cemetery now. Of course, we'll also be following the procession here as it heads to Lenasia Cemetery to put to rest the 9 Malawians that have been identified in that identification process that could only have been painful for these families. 5 of them, Tumelo, coming from one family. It's a mother, a father, and 3 of their children that all lost their lives in that that fire, they could still be visibly identified. In speaking to one of the relatives that actually was part of the identification process, a painful one, in the mortuary here, they could still visibly see their relatives. Hence, they now are going to be let then to go be put in their final resting place. The issue that they had a bit earlier on was just with the embassy giving them a confirmation letter from the Malawian embassy. That's been sorted out, and now, of course, all that's left is that for these families to send off in trying to have a dignified funeral service for their deceased.
No, quite tragic indeed. And also just hearing some of the relatives there, Aviwe, saying they're still crying, just narrating the mourning process, that it is still ongoing. Quite a tragedy that has left them traumatized at this point. I think also just want to remind our viewers that yesterday when we heard from Thembaletu Mpahlaza, the pathologist expert at Deep Sleuth Forensic Services, also with the Department of Health in Gauteng, had reiterated that those services in terms of assisting the families affected in this fire, in identifying their loved ones, will still be open this weekend. So the motivation there, our viewers, that you are encouraged to still come, whether it's a Saturday or a Sunday. There will be, of course, assisting in that regard, but also saying that counselling for the families would also be provided. But I think once again, Aviwe, before I let you go, I mean, we could see definitely a pathology car, a forensic car just leaving there. We're not sure if it's part of, the delegation leaving with the family, or at least entering into Deep Sleuth mortuary. But in as far as, Muslim rights are concerned, they have a time limit, right? They almost have, 24 up to 72 hours to bury their loved ones. That's why I suppose this process, and as far as those Malawians who observe Muslim rights, have to ensure that they do lay their loved ones as early as possible.
Yes, before sunset, Dumelo, according to the Muslim rites, within 24 hours since the loved one perished is when they're supposed to be laid to rest. It's going to be difficult, a painful experience, given that there is still some 64 that have to go through identification via the DNA testing. The family members themselves have to come, and samples have to be taken from them and sort of corroborated and identified via DNA. It could be a lengthy process, which means that it's almost impossible to adhere to those Muslim rights for the at least 64 other deceased here. Well, depending, of course, on their own faith, if there are Muslims in their majority. But we do know at least the 9 that will be laid to rest today could possibly meet those Muslim rights that suggest that by sunset they have to be laid to rest.
Well, of course, as the process still ongoing and continues, Aviwe, I'm sure we'll be dipping in and out just to check how, it's going, but also if any other families have come forward to identify the process. I mean, yesterday we also heard from the Gauteng Department of Health saying it's important for family members and not friends, family members to come forward in terms of identifying their loved ones, because a unique number to identify and match those family members would be required from blood relatives. So you can imagine that in this instance, a friend, a colleague or a neighbor is not going to be helpful in matching that DNA. A family member needs to come forward, but also saying that they would be providing counseling in this regard, and this to ensure that the families are well prepared for what they're about to see, what they're about to witness and identify from their loved ones. It could equally so much so be secondary trauma at this stage. So all the family members encouraged to please get to Deep Sleuth mortuary to identify their loved ones. These services will still be open throughout the weekend, and they will be on standby as officials to assist in this regard. Even though it's a lengthy process, we've heard as well from the Gauteng Department of Health that, load shedding had also had played a role in delaying the finalizing of admin as well as the DNA identification process. But they've made it a point to ensure that they open up those services even throughout the weekend, extending the time as well, so that they can assist those families that at this point need to come forward. I understand that also Family members are encouraged to come with any documentation they may have. However, Home Affairs will also be on standby. Not sure if they're there today, but this past week we had heard that the Gauteng Department of Health was working alongside, their other sister departments like Home Affairs to assist when it comes to, ID copies, passports, etc. Because you can imagine in that blaze, everything was burned, even important documentation to identify those inside the building, went up in flames in that blaze. So we understand officials will also be assisting in that regard, encouraging everyone to please come forward.